On Christmas morning, at exactly 9:12 a.m., with $327,000 of equity sitting in the walls around us, my father told me to pack my things and get out of the house I had paid for. By 9:18, while cinnamon rolls burned in the oven and Silent Night played from the kitchen speaker, my mother folded her arms and said, "You've lived here rent-free long enough, Emily. You're 33. It's time you grew up." If that sounds insane to you, hit like and stay with me, because what happened after that morning wasn't just betrayal. It was exposure. I remember the tree lights blinking behind them. Red, green, gold. The house smelled like sugar and pine, and my childhood ornaments, handmade paper angels, and glittered popsicle sticks hung from branches I had bought and carried inside myself. "Rent-free?" I asked quietly. Dad didn't look at me. He was slicing into the cinnamon rolls. "We think it's best for everyone. The tension isn't healthy." "This is my place," I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered it. "This is my house." Mom rolled her eyes the way she used to when I was 16 and asking for gas money. "You always make everything about you." There's something about being told you're selfish inside a home you purchased in full $412,000 in 2019. 20% down, 3.4% fixed mortgage, that shifts something permanent inside you. I didn't argue. I walked upstairs. For context, my name is Emily Carter. I'm an accountant in Chicago. I've been with the same mid-sized firm for 7 years. I work 60-hour weeks during tax season. I don't take vacations. I don't carry credit card balances. 5 years ago, when my father, Robert Thompson, got laid off from the auto plant after 30 years, and my mother, Linda Thompson, said they couldn't keep up with their $1,800 monthly rent, I told them to move into my house temporarily. Temporary turned into permanent, the way mold grows quietly, in the dark. At first, they offered to contribute. Then they forgot. Then they laughed when I brought it up. Family helps family. That line would come back to haunt me. As I threw clothes into my suitcase that Christmas morning, I felt strangely calm, numb, like my body had already processed this years ago and was just waiting for my mind to catch up. Downstairs, I could hear them setting the table. At 9:46 a.m., my brother Ryan Thompson texted me. "Heard you're finally moving out. Don't make this hard for them." Ryan, the golden child, 31, entrepreneur, chronically unemployed. I zipped my suitcase. When I came down, Mom said, "Please don't make a scene. The neighbors don't need to hear you crying again." Again. I hadn't cried in front of them in 3 years. "You're asking me to leave a house that's legally mine," I said evenly. Dad finally looked at me then. "Watch your tone." There it was. The hierarchy. I was still the child. Even with the deed in my name, and every utility auto-drafted from my checking account. "We'll give you until tonight," Mom added. "Ryan's coming over for dinner." Of course he was. I stepped outside into the cold. Snow was beginning to fall, thin flakes, indifferent. I put my suitcase in the trunk of my car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the wreath on the front door. I had made that wreath last year, while Dad complained about heating bills and Mom said groceries were so expensive these days. My phone buzzed again. "Ryan, they've done enough for you." Enough. I opened my banking app. Electricity, $184 monthly average. Water, $96. Internet, $112. Car insurance for Dad's 2017 Ford Explorer, $168. Joint credit card balance, $12,842, all under my name. One by one, I canceled the auto payments. Electricity scheduled termination. Internet disconnect request submitted. Insurance policy cancellation, effective 11:59 p.m. My thumb hovered over the final item. The additional authorized user on my primary credit card. Robert Thompson. Remove user. Confirm. Done. It didn't feel explosive. It felt surgical. If you've ever been told you're a burden while carrying everyone else's weight, you know this feeling. I drove away at 10:17 a.m. I didn't go far, just to a lake about 4 miles from the house. I parked and watched the snow fall over the frozen water. My phone was silent. That silence lasted 6 hours. At 4:03 p.m., Mom called. I let it ring. At 4:05 p.m., Dad. At 4:07 p.m., Ryan. By 5:12 p.m., I had 19 missed calls. Then came the texts. Why is the power company saying the account is closed? The Wi-Fi just shut off. Emily, this isn't funny. You're being dramatic. Call us right now. I leaned back in my seat and stared at the gray sky. For years, I thought love meant absorbing damage quietly. That morning, I learned something else. Love without respect is servitude. By 7:40 p.m., the final text came from Dad. You're not welcome here anymore. I laughed out loud in my car. Not welcome. In the house where the mortgage statements came addressed to me. That's when the anger hit, not hot, but clean. Because there was one detail they didn't know. The deed wasn't the only thing in my name. And the refinancing paperwork they've been whispering about in the garage for weeks, it required my signature. A signature I never gave. As the snow thickened and the house lights flickered in the distance, I opened my email and found the notification I'd been waiting for. Subject line: Property Equity Loan, pending verification. Someone had tried to file it that morning, under my name. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about me moving out. This was about something much bigger. And I wasn't going to be the only one leaving that house. I woke up the next morning in my car at 6:38 a.m. The temperature outside 24 degrees, my breath fogging the windshield, like a reminder that I was officially homeless in a house I owned. There was $412,000 in property value tied to my name. And yet, I was curled under a coat in the driver's seat because my parents decided I was too comfortable. If you've ever been pushed out of your own life, you know the strange clarity that comes with it. I didn't cry. I checked my email. There it was again. Property Equity Line of Credit. Application received. Loan amount requested. $180,000. Primary borrower: Robert Thompson. Secondary: Emily Carter. My stomach dropped. Secondary borrower, meaning they hadn't just planned to push me out. They planned to use me. I called Maple Bank at 8:02 a.m. as soon as the fraud department opened. Miss Carter, the representative said politely, we received an online HELOC application yesterday using your credentials. We're currently waiting on final verification documents. What kind of verification? I asked, already knowing the answer. Signed authorization and notarized identity confirmation. I closed my eyes. I did not submit that application. There was a pause. Understood. I'm flagging this as potential fraud. Potential. That word felt too soft for what it was. After hanging up, I drove to a cheap roadside motel 10 miles away. $79 a night. No questions asked. I paid cash. Inside the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to map everything in my head. The whispers in the garage. The sudden urgency to refinance. Ryan's smug tone at dinner the week before Christmas. Dad asking to borrow my driver's license months ago to update insurance. My phone buzzed. Ryan, I answered this time. What did you do? He snapped. I protected myself. You froze the utilities? Dad's freaking out. The pipes could burst. That sounds expensive, I said calmly. You're unbelievable, he shot back. We're family. There it was again. Family. Did you apply for a $180,000 loan in my name? I asked. Silence. Then, a laugh. You don't even need that house. You're single. No kids. What are you hoarding it for? My fingers tightened around the phone. It's not hoarding when you bought it. You're overreacting, he said. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork. Let me ask you something. If someone forged your name for nearly $200,000, would you call it paperwork? I hung up. By noon, Dad called. His voice was colder. You embarrassed your mother by canceling accounts in my name? You're acting hysterical. Hysterical. I almost smiled. That loan application, I said evenly. You forged my signature, didn't you? Another pause. Then, it's not forging if we intended to pay it back. That sentence is when the first layer of truth cracked open. They didn't see it as stealing. They saw it as reallocating. What's yours is ours. I ended the call and immediately drove to the bank branch downtown. I asked for the loan officer listed on the application. When he printed the submitted documents, my hands didn't shake. They had uploaded a scanned copy of my driver's license and a digital signature. It looked almost like mine. Almost. Except I never loop my C in Carter that way. Do you recognize this signature? The officer asked. No, I said quietly. but I recognized the person who would try. He nodded slowly. We'll escalate this to fraud investigation. Please do. On the drive back to the motel, something clicked. If they were willing to forge a HELOC, what else had they touched? That afternoon, I pulled my full credit report. There were 3 accounts I didn't recognize. 2 small credit lines opened in 2021. 1 business checking account tied to something called Willow Creek Renovations, LLC. Business address: my house. Owner: Ryan Thompson. My pulse started pounding. I searched the Illinois Business Registry. There it was, filed 8 months ago, using my property as the official headquarters. Without my knowledge, without my consent, without rent. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. This was strategy. They'd been positioning me as the financial backbone of Ryan's business. A business I'd never seen paperwork for. A business that had already taken out 2 small loans. And suddenly, Christmas morning didn't feel spontaneous. It felt planned. Push me out, refinance the house, consolidate debt, fund Ryan, and leave me holding the liability. At 6:14 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Mom. Her voice sounded thin. The heat's gone, she whispered. The house is freezing. I closed my eyes. You told me I didn't live there. Emily, please, it's Christmas. I thought about the tree lights, the cinnamon rolls, the way she'd crossed her arms while telling me to leave. You gave me until tonight, I reminded her. Silence. Then softer. You're really going to do this to us? That question stayed with me. Do this to us. Not, why did we do this to you? That's when I understood something important. They didn't feel guilty. They felt inconvenienced. I didn't start this, I said, and I meant it. After I hung up, I opened my laptop again and logged into the county property portal. Owner of record, Emily Carter. No secondary names. No transfer. But under recent activity, there was a pending document submission. Title modification. Awaiting approval. Submitted December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve dinner. They had tried to change the title, and the system had flagged it for missing notarized authorization, which meant they were scrambling, which meant I wasn't crazy. If you're still listening, ask yourself this. When someone tries to erase you legally, how long were they planning it? I locked my laptop and leaned back against the motel headboard. I didn't feel powerless anymore. I felt awake. And the more awake I became, the more something else surfaced. A memory. 3 weeks before Christmas, I'd walked past the garage and heard Dad say, once the refinance clears, we'll finally be free. Free from what? Free from me? Or free with my equity? The open loop in my mind tightened. Because refinancing requires income documentation, debt disclosure, credit review, which means they had submitted financial statements in my name. And if that was true, then the problem wasn't just family betrayal. It was federal fraud. I stared at the ceiling until midnight. My phone buzzed once more. Ryan. This is going to blow up bigger than you think. For the first time since Christmas morning, I smiled. Good. Let it. 3 days after Christmas, at 8:27 a.m., I received a certified letter from Maple Bank stating that $94,600 in unsecured business debt had been linked to my Social Security number. By 8:41 a.m., I was sitting on the edge of that motel bed, reading the phrase personal guarantee executed over and over again, realizing someone had signed my name to something that could destroy me. If you've ever felt the ground drop out from under you, you know that strange weightlessness before panic sets in. I didn't panic. I got organized. The letter detailed 2 business credit lines opened under Willow Creek Renovations, LLC, both personally guaranteed, both attached to my credit profile. I had never signed a personal guarantee for anything except my own mortgage. I called the fraud investigator directly. Her name was Maria Reyes. Miss Carter, she said calmly, we've escalated your case. There's evidence suggesting identity misuse beyond the HELOC attempt. Beyond? I asked. Yes, there are digital signature submissions tied to an IP address registered to your home internet. My home internet. The same internet I had just shut off. Can you trace the user login? I asked. We're working with compliance, she replied. But I'll be honest, this doesn't look like random fraud. It looks internal. Internal. Family. Layer 1 of the truth had already cracked. They tried to refinance my house. Layer 2 was forming. They hadn't just tried to use my equity. They had been using my identity for months, maybe longer. I drove back to the house that afternoon. The snow had hardened into gray slush. The Christmas wreath still hung on the door, crooked now. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Dad opened the door before I could knock. He looked tired, unshaven, angry. "What do you want?" he demanded. "My financial records," I said evenly. "Every piece of mail with my name on it." Mom appeared behind him, wrapped in a blanket. "You froze everything," she snapped. "We can't even turn the heat back on without a deposit. You can call the utility company and open accounts in your own names." Dad stepped aside reluctantly. Inside, the house was cold, the air stale. The tree lights were off. I walked straight to the kitchen counter, where the mail usually piled up. There were 3 envelopes addressed to me, all opened. "Why were these opened?" I asked. Mom crossed her arms. "We didn't think you'd mind." Didn't think I'd mind. I slid the papers out, carefully. One was a tax document, related to Willow Creek renovations. Form 1099-NEC. Non-employee compensation. $38,200. Paid to Emily Carter. I stared at it. "I never received this income," I said slowly. Ryan's voice came from the hallway. "Relax. It's just accounting." "Just accounting." I turned toward him. "You reported $38,200 in income under my name?" "It balanced the books," he shrugged. "Balanced the books." For a second, I thought I might actually laugh. Instead, I asked, "Did you file taxes on this?" Dad answered instead. "We were going to fix it." Going to. Every crime in that house was always going to be fixed. I gathered every document with my name on it and placed them in a folder I had brought. Then I said something I had never said before. "I'm filing a police report." Silence. Ryan scoffed. "You wouldn't." Mom's face drained of color. "Emily, don't you dare." Dad's jaw clenched. "You're overreacting." "No," I said calmly. "I'm done reacting." And here's the thing. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was clear. There's a difference. I walked out without another word. By 4:15 p.m., I was sitting inside the local police department giving a statement. Identity theft, forgery, fraudulent loan applications, unauthorized business guarantees, tax misrepresentation. The officer took notes carefully. "Are the suspects related to you?" he asked. "Yes." He paused. "Do you want to press charges?" That question felt heavier than anything else so far. Press charges. Against my parents. Against my brother. I thought about Christmas morning, the cinnamon rolls, the phrase, rent-free, the forged signature, the $94,600. "Yes," I said. Layer 2 of the truth had officially surfaced. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was documented fraud. When I left the station, my hands finally started shaking. Not from fear, from finality. That night, my phone exploded. Mom first. "You went to the police?" she sobbed. "Yes." "How could you do this to us?" I closed my eyes. You see the pattern, right? Not, "How could we do this to you?" Always, "How could you do this to us?" Dad left a voicemail an hour later. "You're going to regret humiliating this family." Humiliating. As if I was the scandal. Ryan's message came last. "You think this makes you powerful? Wait until the IRS sees those 1099s. That's when something else clicked. The IRS. If they had reported income under my Social Security number, that meant tax liability, federal liability. I logged into my IRS transcript account. There it was. Additional reported income from Willow Creek renovations, which meant if I hadn't caught it, I would have owed taxes on money I never received. Do you know what that is? That's not sibling rivalry. That's financial sabotage. I called my firm's tax partner the next morning and explained everything. He didn't blink. "File form 14,039, he said immediately. "Identity theft affidavit. We'll amend your return." "How bad is this?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "If the IRS believes you signed those guarantees knowingly, it could get complicated." Complicated. Understatement of the year. By lunchtime, I had filed the affidavit. By 3 p.m., Maria Reyes from the bank called back. "We've confirmed the IP address used to submit the loan applications," she said. "It matches your home router." "Can you confirm the device?" I asked. "Yes." A laptop registered under Ryan Thompson's email. There it was. Not suspicion. Proof. Layer 2 had teeth now. That evening, I sat alone in the motel room, staring at the wall. For years, I had been the responsible one, the quiet one, the dependable one. And somehow, in their story, that made me disposable. There's a sentence I want you to remember. Silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. I had been silent for 5 years. No more. At 9:12 p.m., I received a final notification from the bank. The HELOC application had been formally denied due to fraud investigation. I stared at the screen and felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not relief, power. But here's the open question that kept me awake that night. If they were willing to forge my name for loans and taxes, what else had they touched? Because businesses that desperate don't collapse overnight. They unravel, and something told me I hadn't seen the oldest thread yet. On January 3rd at 7:56 a.m., 2 detectives knocked on my motel door with a warrant in hand and a question that made my stomach turn. "Miss Carter," one of them said, "did you authorize a $52,000 transfer from the Margaret Carter estate account in 2018? By 8:02 a.m., I was sitting on the edge of the bed again. Same spot as the HELOC letter. Same hollow feeling, realizing this didn't start 5 years ago. It started the year my grandmother died. If you're still here with me, ask yourself this. How far back would you look before admitting the betrayal was never temporary? I didn't even know that account still existed, I told them honestly. The older detective, Detective Harris, flipped open a folder. Inside were bank records, transfers from an estate account bearing my grandmother's name, Margaret Louise Carter. Each withdrawal was signed by Robert Thompson. Each deposit landed in an account, later used to capitalize Willow Creek renovations. Capitalized. With my inheritance. The room felt smaller. When did the estate close? I asked. Officially, Harris said. It didn't. He slid another page across. Co-beneficiary, Emily Carter. Secondary signatory authority, Robert Thompson. I felt my throat tighten. He told me the estate had been drained by medical bills, that there was nothing left to fight over. There had been $78,400, and $52,000 of it had vanished within 6 months of her funeral. I remember standing at her graveside in 2018, snow falling lightly, Dad squeezing my shoulder and saying, "Don't worry about paperwork. I'll handle it." Layer 2 wasn't just fraud. It was history. After the detectives left, I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the wall. It's one thing to discover someone stole from you in the present. It's another to realize they've been rewriting your past. I drove straight to Maple Bank's downtown branch and asked to see the estate file. Maria Reyes met me in a small conference room. She didn't waste time. "Your father had limited authority to assist with estate processing," she said carefully. "But he exceeded it." "How?" I asked. "He transferred funds under the guise of settling outstanding liabilities. The paperwork listed contractor invoices." Contractors. Ryan would have been 26 then. Learning, watching. "What kind of invoices?" I pressed. She hesitated. "Construction repairs, equipment purchases, business startup costs." Willow Creek Renovations was founded 8 months after Grandma died. Seed money, my grandmother's money. I leaned back in the chair, a slow burn spreading through my chest. He hadn't just taken advantage of me as an adult. He had leveraged my grief. If you've ever trusted someone during your weakest moment, you understand how deep that cut goes. "Can this be prosecuted?" I asked. "Yes," Maria said quietly. "Especially combined with the recent fraud findings." Combined, the word echoed. This wasn't a string of desperate acts. It was a pattern, and patterns are hard to defend in court. When I left the bank, my phone buzzed. "Ryan." Against my better judgment, I answered. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "Cleaning up." "You're digging up old stuff now?" "That estate was years ago." "It was mine," I said. "It was family money," he shot back. "Dad used it to build something with my name attached. You didn't need it." There it was. The entitlement. The quiet belief that my stability made me expendable. "Did you know?" I asked him. Silence. Then softer, defensive. I knew he needed help. "That wasn't what I asked. Did you know it was my inheritance?" A longer pause. "Yes." The word landed heavier than any insult. You see, betrayal isn't loud. It's calm, casual, confident. He knew, and he didn't care. That afternoon, Detective Harris called. We've issued subpoenas for business records tied to Willow Creek renovations, he said. We're also reviewing tax filings from 2018 onward. Will they be charged? I asked. We build cases with evidence, Miss Carter. And right now, we have quite a bit. Quite a bit. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. My life felt like a spreadsheet unraveling line by line, number by number. And every total pointed back to one truth. They had never intended to pay it back. That night, I drove past the house again. The lights were on this time, generator humming in the driveway. Dad was outside arguing with someone on the phone, probably a lawyer. Ryan paced near the garage. Mom sat in the living room window, staring out into the dark. For a moment, guilt tried to creep in. They looked tired, smaller, human. But then I remembered the estate account. The $1,099, the forged guarantees, and something inside me hardened again. Here's a sentence I want you to hold on to. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. I had been compassionate for years. Now I was drawing lines. At 11:43 p.m., I received an email notification. Subject: IRS, identity theft case, escalated review. They had matched the fraudulent income filings with the business accounts under investigation. Federal. Not just civil. Federal. I lay awake that night, staring into the darkness of the motel room, realizing something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. Control of narrative, control of assets, control of me. If they could keep me doubting myself, I would never check the numbers. If they could paint me as dramatic, I would never question the paperwork. And maybe the most painful part of all, it almost worked. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Ryan. It wasn't Mom. It was a lawyer. And the first thing he said was, Miss Carter, I represent your parents. We'd like to discuss a settlement before this escalates further. Settlement. Already, that meant one thing. They were scared. But what they didn't know yet was that I had just uncovered something even bigger than the estate transfers. Because when Maria emailed me the preliminary review summary at 6:12 a.m., one line stood out. Unreported insurance payout, 2019, $116,000. Beneficiary, Robert Thompson. Insurance payout. From what? There had never been a claim that year. And suddenly I realized the unraveling wasn't even halfway done. On January 6th at 10:14 a.m., I sat across from a defense attorney in a downtown Chicago office while he slid a single sheet of paper toward me and said, "My clients are prepared to resolve this privately." The number printed in bold at the bottom was $25,000. $25,000 to make federal fraud, identity theft, and a stolen inheritance disappear. I almost admired the audacity. Is this a joke? I asked calmly. The attorney, a polished man named Richard Halpern, adjusted his cufflinks. It's a gesture of good faith. Emotions ran high over the holidays. Emotions. As if forged signatures were mood swings. Your clients personally guaranteed $94,600 in business debt under my name, I said. They attempted an equity line of $180,000. They misreported $38,200 in taxable income. And they transferred over $52,000 from my grandmother's estate. Halpern's smile tightened. We can argue intent. There it was again. Intent. They hadn't meant to hurt me. They just meant to use me. If this proceeds, he continued, your family will face felony charges. Your mother in particular. She's emotionally fragile. Fragile. I thought of her crossed arms on Christmas morning. We're willing to sign a repayment agreement, he added. Installments. Over time. Using what income, I asked. He didn't answer that. Instead, he slid another document forward. A non-disclosure agreement. Confidential settlement. In exchange for withdrawing the police complaint. If you're listening, here's the question I wrestled with in that moment. Would you trade justice for quiet? For a few seconds, the room felt suffocating. Part of me wanted it over. No headlines, no courtrooms, no public humiliation. But then I remembered something Detective Harris said 2 nights earlier. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern. Patterns don't stop because you ask nicely. I won't sign, I said simply. Halpern leaned back. You understand this will become public. It already is, I replied. Because here's what people don't tell you about betrayal. It thrives in darkness. I wasn't going back there. When I left his office at 11:03 a.m., my phone buzzed almost immediately. Mom. Against my better judgment, I answered. Why won't you settle this? She cried. We can fix it quietly. Quietly. The word almost made me laugh. Did you know about the estate transfers? I asked her. A pause. We needed that money, she whispered. That wasn't my question. Silence stretched thin between us. Yes, she finally admitted. Layer 2 solidified. They all knew. They all participated. Why? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Because you're strong, she said. You always land on your feet. That was her justification. I was capable. So I was expendable. Strength isn't consent, I said. She started crying again. But this time, I didn't feel pulled toward it. I felt done. That afternoon, Maria Reyes called with an update. We've uncovered additional financial activity, she said carefully. My stomach tightened. What kind? An insurance payout in 2019 for $116,000, filed under a property damage claim. There was no damage in 2019, I said immediately. I'm aware, she replied. The claim cited structural water damage requiring emergency repairs. I saw it instantly. Willow Creek renovations, Dad's company, insurance payout, repair invoices, funded business. It was self-dealing, I whispered. Yes, self-dealing. Filing a claim on my property, routing repairs through their own LLC, pocketing the difference. I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. This wasn't panic. It was comprehension. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had turned my house into an asset pipeline. Mortgage in my name, insurance in my name, business registered at my address, loans guaranteed by my credit, estate funds diverted for startup capital, fraudulent income reported to manipulate taxes. Every system pointed back to one thing: me. I pulled over on the side of the road and stared at the steering wheel. For 5 years, I thought I was helping my parents rebuild. In reality, I had been underwriting a scheme. If you've ever realized you were the foundation of your own exploitation, you know how cold that understanding feels. That evening, Detective Harris called again. We've obtained preliminary evidence of insurance fraud tied to the 2019 claim, he said. Adjuster statements don't match the reported damage. So this isn't just about me anymore, I said. No, he replied. This is broader. Broader. That meant federal agencies. That meant potential prison time. I expected to feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt something else. Grief. Because prison wasn't abstract. It meant courtrooms, sentencing, handcuffs. I drove back to the house one more time that night. The generator was gone. The lights were dim. Ryan's car wasn't in the driveway. Dad was outside smoking. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the snow-covered lawn. You're destroying us, he called out. No, I answered evenly. I stopped saving you. He shook his head slowly. You think you're better than us. No, I said. I just think I finally see you. He flicked the cigarette into the snow. You'll regret this. Maybe. But here's the thing no one prepares you for. Regret and self-respect cannot coexist in the same space for long. And I was done, shrinking to preserve their comfort. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again. A notification from the IRS portal. Status: Criminal Investigation Division. Preliminary review. I stared at the screen. This was no longer civil, no longer private, no longer containable. Layer 3 was beginning to surface. Legal consequences, real ones. And deep down, beneath the grief and exhaustion, there was a truth I couldn't ignore. They had built their entire stability on the assumption that I would never fight back. And now, the system was starting to fight for me. But what I didn't know yet was that the public unraveling wouldn't start in a courtroom. It would start somewhere much louder and much more humiliating. On January 14th at 6:42 p.m., during the annual Willow Creek Chamber of Commerce Winter Gala, with 214 attendees, 3 local reporters, and a silent auction benefiting small businesses, my brother stood on stage, accepting an Emerging Entrepreneur Award. By 6:49 p.m., the projector behind him froze mid-speech and displayed a federal fraud subpoena with his name on it. That was the night the unraveling went public. If you've ever wondered whether karma needs perfect timing, trust me, it does. I hadn't planned to attend the gala. I didn't want to see them smiling under string lights while investigations moved quietly in the background. But Detective Harris had called 2 days earlier. "We've issued formal subpoenas for business records," he said. "The service process may not be subtle." Not subtle. I didn't realize how literal he meant that. The gala was held at the Lakeshore Banquet Hall. White tablecloths, champagne towers, fairy lights draped from the ceiling. Ryan wore a navy suit. Dad stood beside him, hand on his shoulder like a proud investor. Mom floated between tables, telling anyone who would listen that family businesses are built on sacrifice. I stood in the back, near the exit. I didn't clap when Ryan's name was called. Willow Creek Renovations has revitalized over 12 properties this year, the MC announced. A true example of local resilience. Resilience. At 6:48 p.m., 2 federal agents walked through the side doors. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They simply approached the stage and handed Ryan a sealed envelope. The room went silent in a way that only happens when wealth and reputation collide with authority. Ryan's smile faltered. Dad stepped forward, trying to intercept. One of the agents said clearly, "This is a federal subpoena for financial records and a notice of investigation under Title 18. Title 18. Federal Criminal Code." You could hear forks clink against plates. Mom's face drained of color. Someone near me whispered, "What's happening?" The projector behind Ryan glitched, probably someone fumbling with the laptop in panic. And for half a second, the screen displayed a scanned copy of the subpoena header before going black. That half second was enough. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. Ryan tried to laugh. "This is a misunderstanding," he said into the microphone. Denial. Dad stepped in next. "This is politically motivated," he barked. "Competitors trying to sabotage us. Blame shifting." Mom began crying. "They're attacking our family," she sobbed. "We've sacrificed everything." Victim narrative. I stood still. Because this wasn't revenge. It was consequence. An agent turned slightly and saw me near the exit. Our eyes met briefly. He gave a subtle nod. Confirmation. I didn't move. Ryan's voice cracked through the microphone again. "Emily did this," he snapped suddenly, scanning the crowd until he found me. "She's been trying to destroy us for weeks." All eyes turned. And here's where something unexpected happened. I didn't defend myself. I walked forward. Slowly. He looked stunned. The room felt electric. "You forged my signature," I said calmly, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "You reported income under my social security number. You transferred funds from our grandmother's estate, and you filed a fraudulent insurance claim on my house." A murmur rippled outward like a wave. Dad stepped toward me. "Stop this right now." "No," I said evenly. "You stop." Silence. If you've ever held your ground in a room that expected you to shrink, you know how heavy that moment feels. Ryan scoffed. "You can't prove that." One of the agents stepped forward again. "We can." He held up a folder. "The subpoena includes digital signature forensics, IP trace data, and transaction logs." There it was. Evidence. Not emotion. Not accusation. Data. Dad's face shifted. For the first time, I saw something unfamiliar there. Fear. The MC awkwardly tried to regain control of the microphone, but no one was listening. Guests were already whispering. Local reporter, table 3, was typing rapidly into her phone. Ryan's jaw tightened. "You think this makes you powerful?" he hissed at me. I leaned closer, just enough so only he could hear the next sentence. "No, it makes me finished. Because here's the truth. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was trying to end it." Mom grabbed my arm. "Please," she whispered. "Not like this." I gently removed her hand. "You chose like this," I replied. The agents escorted Ryan and Dad outside for questioning. Not arrested. Not yet, but escorted. And perception matters. The room felt colder than the snow outside. I walked toward the exit. Someone from the chamber board caught my sleeve. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. That was all. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with flashing lights. Reporters had already arrived. Ryan was arguing loudly near a patrol vehicle. Dad stood stiffly beside him. Mom was crying into her phone. I stayed in the shadows. Because this wasn't my performance. It was theirs, collapsing. My phone buzzed. Maria Reyes. It's official, she said. The U.S. Attorney's Office has opened a formal case. Formal. That meant indictments were possible. That meant court. That meant prison was no longer theoretical. I leaned against my car and looked up at the dark sky. The snow had started again, soft, indifferent. For years, they had managed perception carefully. Church donations, community events, small business awards. They controlled the narrative. Tonight, that control cracked. Not because I screamed. Not because I exposed them dramatically, but because paperwork doesn't lie. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Flashing lights painted the banquet hall red and blue. Ryan was still shouting. Dad was silent now. Mom looked lost. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I didn't feel grief. I felt distance. But here's the part no one saw. As I pulled onto the highway, my hands started shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of what comes next. Because subpoenas are not convictions. Investigations are not sentences. And families under indictment fight back harder than families in denial. Layer 3 had begun. Legal consequences. Public consequences. But I knew something they didn't. There was still one piece of evidence I hadn't turned over yet. One document that would shift this from financial misconduct to something far worse. And I was waiting for the right moment to use it. 3 nights after the gala, at 11:26 p.m., my phone rang from an unknown number, and the voice on the other end said, "You don't understand how ugly this is going to get." The call lasted exactly 42 seconds. I didn't say a word the entire time. If you've ever dealt with people who lose control, you know the next phase isn't apology. It's escalation. By then, the story had spread beyond Willow Creek. Local news stations picked it up. Then, a regional business blog. The headline used words like alleged embezzlement and identity fraud. My name wasn't central, but it was there. Primary reporting party, whistleblower, daughter. The framing didn't matter. What mattered was this. The silence I had broken was now echoing. The next morning, I woke up to 67 unread messages. Half were from numbers I didn't recognize. A few were supportive. Most were not. Family traitor. You'll regret humiliating your parents. Blood is blood. It's funny how quickly strangers become moral experts when scandal hits. I didn't respond. Silence can be protection. But this time, it wasn't the old kind of silence. The shrinking kind. It was strategic. At 9:04 a.m., Detective Harris called. "Your father retained new counsel," he said. "They're pushing hard for mediation before formal indictment." "On what grounds?" I asked. "They're arguing coercion. That you were financially controlling. That they acted under duress." I almost laughed. Duress, as if I had forced them to forge my signature at gunpoint. "They'll try to flip the narrative," he added. "Be prepared." Flip the narrative. That was their strongest skill. They'd been rewriting my reality for years. Why stop now? By noon, the first article framed it differently. Family financial dispute escalates into federal review. Dispute. Like we were arguing over holiday plans. That's when I understood something important. Truth doesn't speak for itself. It needs timing. And I still hadn't used the document sitting in the bottom drawer of my motel dresser. The one I'd found 2 nights after the estate records. The one that connected the insurance payout to something bigger. I didn't move yet. I waited. Because dangerous silence isn't empty. It's calculating. That afternoon, I received a formal letter from their new attorney, requesting a meeting. Again. This time, the language was sharper. Your continued cooperation with investigators may result in irreparable harm to all parties. All parties. The phrasing almost impressed me. Shared destruction. As if accountability were a bomb I was holding. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the courthouse and sat in the back of a public hearing unrelated to my case. I just listened. Listened to the way lawyers bend words. Listened to the way judges cut through them. Listened to the weight of official language. Because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't fighting emotionally anymore. I was preparing structurally. That evening, Ryan showed up at my motel. I saw he looked exhausted. Eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "You're enjoying this," he said immediately. "No," he scoffed. "You've always thought you were smarter than us." Smarter. As if intelligence were the crime. "You forged my name." I said calmly. You didn't need that money, he shot back. You hoard everything. You sit on assets while the rest of us struggle. There it was again. Entitlement dressed as resentment. You had options, I said. You chose fraud. He stepped closer. You think prison fixes anything? That was the first time he said it out loud. Prison. The word hung between us, like smoke. I think consequences clarify things, I replied. His expression shifted then. Not anger. Fear. They're going to come after Mom harder than you think, he said quietly. She signed things too. Layer 3 deepened. Did she know? I asked. He hesitated. Yes. That answer didn't shock me anymore. It confirmed what I already felt. They'll charge Dad first, he continued, then me. They'll pressure her to testify. That's how federal cases work. Divide, document, apply pressure. He looked at me like he expected me to break, to say I'd call it off, to say I'd protect them. Instead, I said something that surprised even me. I won't lie for you. His jaw tightened. You're not innocent in this either, he snapped suddenly. I held his gaze. What did you just say? He smirked faintly. Think about 2019. Think about the insurance inspection. You were home. The memory flickered. An inspector walking through the basement. Dad talking fast. Me, distracted, working from home, trusting the process. You signed off on the repair authorization. Ryan added quietly. My stomach dropped. I had signed a document. Routine approval for contractor access. Willow Creek Renovations was listed as emergency responder. I hadn't thought twice. It wasn't a fraud form. It was access authorization. But in court, signatures blur. Ryan watched my face carefully. You're not as clean as you think, he said softly. And then he left. I closed the door and leaned against it. For the first time since Christmas, doubt crept in. Not guilt, not shame, risk. Because if the insurance claim tied to my house was fraudulent, and my signature appeared anywhere near it, defense counsel would weaponize that. I pulled the document from the drawer. Emergency mitigation authorization. Signed, Emily Carter. Date, April 17th, 2019. Below it, invoice summary. $116,000, structural water remediation. I remembered that spring. A minor pipe leak in the basement. Some drywall damage. Nothing catastrophic. $116,000 didn't match that memory. I had signed access, not a claim. But in court, nuance disappears. That's when I realized something chilling. They hadn't just forged my name. They'd positioned me inside the paperwork, close enough to blur, close enough to complicate. If you've ever been pulled into someone else's scheme slowly, you know how terrifying that realization feels. They didn't just use me, they embedded me. That night, I didn't sleep. I reviewed every document again, cross-referenced dates, compared signatures, mapped transaction flows, and then I found it. A supplemental claim addendum filed 3 days after my authorization, signed digitally, not by me, but attached to my email address. Timestamp, 2:13 a.m. IP address, same as the loan applications. That was the piece, the one I hadn't turned over yet. Because once I did, this would no longer be defensive. It would be decisive. By morning, I had made a choice. I wasn't going to argue publicly. I wasn't going to respond to articles. I wasn't going to fight narrative spin. I was going to stay silent. And then I was going to submit that addendum to federal investigators. Because silence, when timed correctly, isn't weakness. It's leverage. And the moment I handed over that document, the story would shift from messy family dispute to organized financial conspiracy. And there would be no walking that back. At 5:52 a.m. on January 20th, with 312 unread notifications lighting up my phone and exactly one digital file open on my laptop, I forwarded the insurance addendum to the U.S. Attorney's Office. By 6:03 a.m., I had attached the IP logs, the metadata report, and the timestamp comparison chart I built myself. I didn't write anything dramatic in the email, just one sentence. Please see attached supplemental filing tied to prior fraudulent activity. If you've ever learned the power of restraint, you know this. Silence, when documented, is lethal. I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the laptop, brewed coffee, and sat at the motel desk like it was any other Tuesday morning. The difference was this. Up until now, the case could still be argued as financial mismanagement. After today, it couldn't, because the addendum showed intentional falsification of damages. The original emergency authorization I signed in 2019 was legitimate minor water intrusion, drywall replacement, dehumidifiers. But the supplemental claim filed 3 days later, it inflated the damage to structural compromise, foundation instability, and extensive mold remediation. $116,000 payout, deposited into an account controlled by Willow Creek Renovations. And the digital signature on that addendum? It carried my name. But the metadata told a different story. Signed at 2:13 a.m. from Ryan's registered device. On a night I was out of town at a tax conference in Milwaukee. Hotel receipt. Time-stamped keycard log. GPS metadata from my phone. They overplayed their hand. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. Maria Reyes. "We received your submission," she said, her tone sharper. "This changes classification," she added. "To what?" I asked. "Conspiracy." The word landed heavy. Conspiracy means coordination. Intent means prison isn't hypothetical anymore. "Thank you for holding on to this," she said quietly. I almost laughed. Holding on to it had nearly broken me. But timing matters. If I had submitted it during Christmas week, it would have looked reactive. Now, it looked strategic. By noon, I noticed something. Ryan's social media accounts went dark. Dad's LinkedIn disappeared. Willow Creek Renovations' website redirected to an error page. Someone had tipped them off, or they sensed the shift. Either way, the walls were closing. At 2:41 p.m., Detective Harris called. "Federal warrant requests have been expedited," he said. "Search and seizure, likely within days." Days, not months. Days. "You may experience backlash," he added carefully. "I already am," I replied. He paused. "No, I mean direct." I understood. Desperation breeds volatility. That evening, I packed my things and moved to a short-term rental downtown. Anonymous building. Security desk. Key fob access. I didn't tell anyone except my lawyer. Because here's something people don't talk about when justice starts moving. People who lose everything don't always go quietly. At 8:22 p.m., Ryan texted, "You think you're safe?" I didn't respond. Another message. "Check your email." I waited 10 minutes before opening it. Subject: Your role in 2019 claim. Attachment: a screenshot of my signed emergency authorization with the caption, "Looks like you signed off on it." There it was. The attempt. Intimidation. Implying shared guilt. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Detective Harris. And then, I blocked Ryan's number. Because here's a truth that took me years to learn. You don't negotiate with someone who already crossed every line. You document them. By midnight, I was sitting on the floor of my new rental, back against the couch, lights off, city glow filtering through the blinds. I wasn't scared. I was tired. Tired of the narrative. Tired of the defense tactics. Tired of the way they kept framing this as mutual destruction. It wasn't. I didn't take anything from them. I just stopped absorbing the damage. At 6:11 a.m. the next morning, the first warrant was executed. I know because a reporter called me at 6:34. "Federal agents were seen entering your family's property this morning," she said. "Do you have a comment?" I kept my voice even. No comment. Because the loudest move in chess isn't the queen. It's the checkmate no one sees coming. By 9 a.m., images were circulating. Agents carrying boxes. Hard drives seized. Dad standing on the porch, face pale. Ryan arguing with someone off camera. Mom crying into her hands. Public. Irreversible. At 11:18 a.m., Maria called again. "They found duplicate signature templates stored on Ryan's laptop," she said, "including yours. Templates. Saved versions of my name, like tools, like weapons." I closed my eyes. "You did the right thing," she said. Did I? Let me ask you something. If the only way to stop abuse is exposure, is that cruelty or clarity? By 2:45 p.m., the U.S. Attorney's Office announced formal charges pending grand jury review. Financial fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, conspiracy. Layer 3 had fully surfaced. Not just evidence, consequences. And here's what changed inside me in that moment. I stopped waiting for them to apologize. I stopped wondering if they understood. I stopped needing them to. Because the system understood. That night, my lawyer called. They're considering plea negotiations, he said. Already? Yes. Once conspiracy sticks, leverage shifts. Leverage. That's what silence had bought me. Not revenge. Not drama. Leverage. I stood by the window and watched snow fall over the city skyline. A year ago, I would have been inside that house decorating for winter, cooking, paying bills, pretending. Now I was somewhere anonymous, alone. But not small. My phone buzzed one last time before midnight. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Dad. His voice sounded different. Not angry, not defensive, scared. "They're saying prison," he whispered. "Emily, they're saying real time." For a moment, I closed my eyes. Not out of guilt, out of gravity. Because real time means consequences don't evaporate. "They offered a deal," he continued. "If we cooperate." Cooperate. That meant testimony. Against each other. Divide. Document. Pressure. Layer 3 wasn't just about charges. It was about fracture. And for the first time, I realized something chilling. This wasn't going to end with a courtroom explosion. It was going. And when that happened, the final truth would surface. Not just what they did to me, but what they'd been doing long before I ever noticed. On January 28th at 3:16 p.m., I received a call from the assistant U.S. attorney handling the case. And the first sentence out of her mouth was, "Your brother is cooperating." By 3:22 p.m., I was staring out the 14th floor window of my rental, watching traffic crawl below, realizing the fracture had begun. If you've ever dealt with a family built on loyalty to secrecy, you know this. The moment one person talks, the entire structure shakes. "Cooperating how?" I asked carefully. The prosecutor, Ms. Elaine Porter, didn't waste words. "He's provided digital access credentials, internal accounting logs, and a sworn preliminary statement against Dad." The silence between us carried the implication. "And my mother?" I asked. "She's seeking separate counsel." Separate. The family unit that had presented itself as unbreakable for years was now 3 defendants with 3 strategies. Divide, document, pressure. Layer 3 wasn't just about prison anymore. It was about survival. "Why now?" I asked. "Because conspiracy carries mandatory minimum exposure," she replied. "He's trying to reduce sentencing risk." Mandatory minimum. Real time, not probation, not fines. Years. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not relief. Disappointment. Because Ryan cooperating didn't mean remorse. It meant calculation. I sat down at the kitchen counter and opened my notebook, the same one where I'd been mapping transactions for weeks. If Ryan was talking, that meant the digital trail was stronger than I thought. And if he was protecting himself, that meant he might be redirecting blame. At 4:11 p.m., my lawyer called. "They're floating a plea structure," he said. "Your brother testifies that your father orchestrated the scheme. In exchange, reduced charges." "And the insurance fraud?" I asked. "Included." "And my name?" "You're cleared." Fully. Fully. The word felt heavy. For months, I'd been bracing for ambiguity, for shared liability arguments. Now, suddenly, I was structurally removed. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. This was the dangerous quiet stage, the part where everything slows before collapsing. That night, my phone buzzed again. "Mom." I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Ryan is blaming your father," she said without greeting. "I know. They're tearing each other apart." Silence. For years, she'd framed unity as strength. Now, unity was liability. "You can stop this," she whispered. There it was, the final attempt. "You can withdraw cooperation." "No," I said. "You'll lose all of us," she added softly. That line almost worked. Almost. But here's what I've learned. You can't lose something that never truly protected you. "I already did," I replied. She didn't argue. She just cried quietly before hanging up. At 10:37 p.m., Ryan texted from an unknown number. I did what I had to. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. So did I. Because that was the truth. No anger, no venom, just clarity. The next morning, headlines shifted. Federal case expands amid family cooperation. The narrative was changing. No longer dispute. Now, investigation. The Chamber of Commerce quietly removed Ryan's award from their website. Sponsors distanced themselves. Donations dried up. The unraveling was no longer private. It was financial, public, structural. At 1:00 p.m., Ms. Porter called again. "We've secured email correspondence from 2018, she said. "Your father instructing your brother to use Emily's profile, clean credit, low risk." Clean credit, low risk. I swallowed hard. I had been categorized, not as daughter, not as family, as asset. "Will that be entered into evidence?" I asked. Yes, there it was. Intent. Documented. Layer 1, betrayal. Layer 2, evidence. Layer 3, consequence. All aligned. That afternoon, I walked along the river downtown, coat wrapped tight against the wind. The city felt indifferent. People rushed past with coffee cups and headphones. No one knew the internal war that had defined my year. And suddenly, I felt something unexpected. Grief for the illusion. Because no matter how justified justice is, it still marks the death of something. Not love, not trust. Those were gone, long ago. But illusion. The illusion that maybe, one day, they would choose differently. At 5:28 p.m., my lawyer called one more time. "Grand jury review is scheduled for next week," he said. "Indictments likely to follow." Indictments, plural. "And your brother's cooperation strengthens the case." Of course it does. Divide and conquer isn't just a strategy, it's a mirror. They built their power by dividing responsibility and conquering through silence. Now the system was dividing them, and silence was no longer an option. That night, I opened my laptop and began drafting something new. Not a legal document, a proposal. Margaret's Haven had been helping women quietly, case by case. But I wanted something bigger. A formal, nonprofit registration. Legal defense fund. Educational seminars on financial abuse. Because here's the truth I couldn't ignore. What happened to me wasn't rare. It was just hidden. At 11:14 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Dad. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "Your brother lied." I listened to it twice. No apology, no ownership, just accusation. Even now, even facing federal charges, blame was easier than truth. I deleted the message. Because here's a sentence I want you to remember. Accountability feels like betrayal to people who never expected to face it. The next morning, the sun rose pale over the skyline. For the first time since Christmas, I didn't check my phone immediately. I made coffee. I stood by the window. I breathed. Because something inside me had shifted. The fight phase was ending. The outcome phase was beginning. But there was still one unpredictable variable left. Grand juries don't just indict. They examine. And if Ryan was talking, there might be details I didn't even know about yet. Details that could change everything. Because cooperation doesn't just expose the guilty, it exposes the full story. And I wasn't sure I was ready to hear all of it. On February 3rd at 10:07 a.m., 12 jurors walked into a federal courtroom to decide whether my family's secrets were crimes. By 10:52 a.m., the grand jury returned sealed indictments, carrying a maximum exposure of 27 years. I didn't clap. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. If you've ever waited for truth to move from rumor to record, you know that moment the shift from accusation to indictment feels less like victory and more like gravity finally doing its job. The courtroom smelled like old wood and paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I sat behind the prosecutor's table, hands folded in my lap, listening as the clerk read the counts. Wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Robert Thompson, Ryan Thompson, Linda Thompson lesser counts, aiding and abetting, financial misrepresentation. Hearing my parents' full names spoken like that without mom, without dad, felt surreal. Names stripped of titles. The judge set bail conditions. Ryan's attorney argued cooperation. Dad's attorney argued misunderstanding. Mom's attorney argued emotional coercion, denial, blame. Victimhood. Exactly as predicted. The judge didn't entertain narratives. He entertained evidence. Bail was granted with strict conditions: electronic monitoring, travel restrictions, asset freezes. Not prison, not yet, but public, permanent. As we exited the courtroom, reporters waited like birds circling fresh air. "Miss Carter," Do you feel vindicated? I paused. For a second, I considered saying nothing. Then I answered, carefully, I feel heard. That was the truth. Not triumphant, not gleeful. Heard. And here's something no one tells you about public exposure. It's loud. Phones buzzed all afternoon. News alerts, opinion pieces, social media threads dissecting our family like a case study. Some called me brave. Some called me cold. Some said I should have handled it privately. Let me ask you something. How private should a $116,000 fraudulent insurance claim be? How quiet should identity theft remain? That evening, I met with Miss Porter and Detective Harris to review next steps. Your brother's testimony strengthens conspiracy, Porter said, flipping through a file. But it also reveals something new. My stomach tightened. What? She slid a printed email chain across the table. Subject line: Phase 3. Date: March 2019. From Robert Thompson to Ryan Thompson. Once insurance clears, shift focus to title. Emily won't notice if we position it as estate consolidation. I stared at the words. Title. They weren't just planning loans. They were planning ownership transfer. Estate consolidation. Using Grandma's death as justification to absorb my property. I felt the room tilt slightly. How far did that go? I asked. Porter didn't hesitate. Draft quitclaim deed prepared. Not executed. Not executed. Because the HELOC attempt failed. Because I noticed. Because I stopped them. If you're still with me, understand this. I wasn't an obstacle. I was the plan. They didn't react to opportunity. They engineered it. The meeting ended with scheduling. Arraignment in 2 weeks. Pretrial motions, likely. Possible plea negotiations. Legal language stacking up like bricks. Outside, the air was brittle with cold. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt something more complicated. Because indictment doesn't end relationships. It redefines them. That night, Mom called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Her voice was hollow. They're making your father the mastermind, she said. He wrote the emails. I replied. He didn't mean... Stop, I said quietly. There was a pause. Then, softer, Ryan says he's sorry. For what? I asked. Silence. Exactly. Sorry without specificity is survival, not remorse. I don't want you to hate us, she whispered. Hate. That word again. I closed my eyes. I don't hate you, I said honestly. I just don't trust you. Trust is harder to rebuild than reputation. She cried again. But this time, I didn't feel pulled in. Because here's another truth. You can love someone and still refuse to save them. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and finalized the nonprofit registration for Margaret's Haven. Articles of incorporation filed. Board members confirmed. Legal aid partnerships secured. If my family built a scheme out of entitlement, I would build something out of truth. The next morning, headlines expanded. Federal indictment filed in high-profile family fraud case. High profile. The phrase felt absurd. We weren't celebrities. We were ordinary people who assumed ordinary manipulation would stay hidden. But here's what makes stories go viral. Relatability. Daughters reading the article saw themselves. Women who'd co-signed loans out of guilt. Wives who'd trusted husbands with paperwork. People started emailing the nonprofit before it officially launched. My father used my credit without asking. My husband forged my name on a business lease. I thought I was crazy. You're not crazy. You were conditioned. That realization steadied me more than any court ruling. 2 days before arraignment, Ryan requested a meeting. Neutral location. Lawyers present. I agreed. We met in a small conference room downtown. He looked thinner, eyes tired. Confidence gone. They're offering me 4 to 6 if I testify fully, he said. Years, not months. I nodded. You should take it, I said. He blinked. You don't even care? I care about truth, I replied. He leaned forward. Dad's blaming you for everything, he said quietly. Says you were controlling. That you drove him into desperation. There it was, even now. Even indicted. Blame travels downward. He sent the emails, I said evenly. Ryan looked at his hands. I didn't think it would go this far. There it was. Not remorse. Underestimation. I studied him carefully. Did you ever plan to tell me? I asked. He didn't answer. That silence said everything. We ended the meeting without shaking hands. As I walked out into the cold afternoon, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not triumph, finality. Because arraignment was coming. Charges would be read publicly. Plea deals discussed. Trial dates scheduled. The spectacle phase. But here's the part no one anticipated. At arraignment, there would be one more reveal. One document entered into record. One piece of evidence Ryan hadn't mentioned in cooperation. Because when I reviewed the digital files they seized, I found something neither of them expected to surface. And when it did, the collapse wouldn't just be legal, it would be personal and irreversible. On February 18th at 9:03 a.m., my father stood before a federal judge and said, "Not guilty." By 9:17 a.m., a document neither he nor Ryan knew I had was entered into the public record. If you've ever watched someone deny something you can prove, you understand the strange calm that settles over you. It isn't anger. It's inevitability. The courtroom was fuller this time. Reporters lined the back wall. A few former Chamber of Commerce members sat stiffly in the gallery. My name had been printed in 3 different headlines that week. Family whistleblower. Daughter testifies. Fraud case deepens. Ryan entered first, suit slightly loose now, face pale but composed. His attorney whispered constantly in his ear. Dad walked in after him, shoulders still squared, chin lifted. Like this was a misunderstanding that paperwork would fix. Mom followed last, small and silent, eyes down. When the clerk read the indictment aloud again, Dad didn't react. Wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, insurance fraud, conspiracy. Mr. Thompson, the judge asked, how do you plead? Not guilty, he said clearly. Denial, exactly on script. Ryan's attorney stood next. Your Honor, my client intends to enter a cooperation agreement with the United States. There it was. The fracture, official. Dad's head snapped toward him. For the first time, something real flickered across his face. Betrayal. Funny how that feels different when it lands on you. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, in light of Mr. Ryan Thompson's cooperation and new evidence obtained during digital forensic review, the government moves to supplement the record. That was my cue. The document was handed to the clerk, marked as Exhibit 42. It was an email, dated April 14th, 2019, from Robert Thompson to Ryan Thompson. C. Linda Thompson. Subject: if Emily pushes back. The courtroom grew very quiet. The prosecutor read it aloud. If Emily pushes back, we escalate the stress narrative. She's already isolated. Remind her she's ungrateful. Worst case, we document instability. Banks don't like volatile borrowers. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Dad's face drained of color. Ryan stared straight ahead. Mom closed her eyes. Escalate the stress narrative. Document instability. Banks don't like volatile borrowers. They weren't just stealing from me. They were preparing to discredit me. If I had resisted earlier, if I had confronted them without documentation, they were ready to paint me as unstable, to undermine my credibility, to weaponize perception. The prosecutor continued. This communication was retrieved from Mr. Thompson's archived email account and verified through server logs. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Thompson, he said slowly, your counsel may wish to confer with you. Dad leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently. But there are moments when whispering doesn't matter, because the room already heard you. Ryan's attorney stood again. Your Honor, in light of Exhibit 42, my client reiterates his intent to cooperate fully. There it was. Self-preservation. Dad looked at Ryan like he'd been stabbed, which, in a way, he had. But here's the irony. He taught him how. Divide, deflect, survive. Now Ryan was just applying the lesson. The judge set a trial date for Dad. Ryan's plea hearing was scheduled separately. Mom's counsel requested probation negotiation. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned, but no one moved immediately. Because Exhibit 42 didn't just prove fraud. It proved intent to manipulate, to gaslight, to destabilize. If you've ever been told you're dramatic, while someone quietly builds a case against you, you know what that revelation feels like. It doesn't hurt. It clarifies. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited again. Miss Carter, how do you feel about your brother testifying against your father? I paused. I feel like the truth is doing what it always does, I said. It's separating itself. No drama, no celebration, just reality. Ryan avoided eye contact as he exited through a side door. Dad stopped briefly near the steps. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Not as an asset, not as leverage, not as a child, as the reason his strategy collapsed. "You could have stopped this," he said quietly as officers guided him forward. I met his gaze evenly. "So could you." And that was the last direct sentence we exchanged as free people in the same space. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights reflecting off the windows. I thought I'd feel triumphant after Exhibit 42. I didn't. I felt steady, because revenge isn't loud. It's patient. It's organized. It's knowing you kept receipts while someone else kept excuses. My phone buzzed once before midnight. "Mom," I answered. Her voice was thin. "He says you betrayed him." I closed my eyes briefly. "He built a plan to destroy my credibility," I said. "Years ago." She didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She just whispered, "I didn't think you'd send that email. You were CC'd." But I didn't say that. Because at this point, acknowledgement wasn't necessary. The system had it in writing. Before we hung up, she asked one final question. "Will you ever forgive us?" Forgiveness. That word again. "I don't know," I said honestly. But forgiveness doesn't cancel consequences. And that's the part people misunderstand. Forgiveness is personal. Consequences are structural. The next morning, headlines shifted again. Email reveals intent to manipulate daughter in federal fraud case. Intent. Not misunderstanding. Not family dispute. Intent. Layer 3 was complete. Betrayal. Evidence. Consequence. But as I sat there, watching the sun rise over the skyline, I realized something unexpected. The fight was almost over. The courtroom phase would run its course. Plea deals. Sentencing. Probation. Prison. But my war, the internal one, was ending. Because the final weapon they tried to use against me wasn't money. It was narrative. And now that narrative belonged to the record. There was only one chapter left, and it wasn't about courtrooms. It was about peace. On April 22nd at 2:14 p.m., the judge sentenced my father to 9 years in federal prison and my brother to 5. By 2:37 p.m., as the courtroom emptied and reporters rushed outside, I realized I felt nothing explosive. No triumph, no collapse, just quiet. If you've ever waited for a storm to end, you know that moment the sky clears, and instead of cheering, you just breathe. Dad stood straight when the sentence was read, still proud, still rigid, until the words "remanded into custody" echoed through the room. That was when his shoulders lowered. Ryan didn't look at anyone. Mom sat behind them, hands trembling in her lap. She received 3 years probation and mandatory restitution payments. The court called her complicit, but not primary. Complicit, that word lingered. Afterward, outside the courthouse, microphones waited again. "Do you feel justice was served?" I answered the same way I had before. I feel finished. Because revenge wasn't what carried me here. Documentation did. Boundaries did. Truth did. I drove home, alone. No calls, no texts, just the hum of the highway and the strange stillness that comes when a chapter closes completely. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the lake. The wind was cool, the water steady. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. I wasn't waiting for another email, another subpoena, another accusation. It was over. But endings don't automatically heal you. They give you space to start. 2 weeks later, Margaret's Haven officially opened its first permanent office. Small space, second floor of a brick building. 3 desks, 1 conference room. A sign near the door that read, "Financial abuse is real. So is recovery." The first woman who walked in looked exactly how I must have looked months ago. Exhausted. Confused. Ashamed. "He says I'm overreacting," she whispered during our consultation. "That I should trust him." I met her eyes and said something I wish someone had told me years ago. "Trust is earned. Access isn't." She cried quietly, but she didn't look crazy. She looked seen. That became the rhythm of my new life. Paperwork, workshop, legal referrals, coffee-stained desks, and late nights drafting grant proposals. Healing isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. It's choosing yourself again and again until it feels normal. Mom wrote once after sentencing. A short letter. No defense. No excuses. Just, I hope one day you find peace. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. Because peace wasn't something she could grant me. I had already built it. 6 months later, I visited the lake where I had parked my car on Christmas morning. The snow was gone. Spring light shimmered over the water. I stood there, hands in my coat pockets, and thought about the woman who sat in that driver's seat, believing she was alone. She wasn't alone. She was waking up. There's a sentence I carry with me now. Silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. And another one. Love without respect is servitude. If this story taught me anything, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by boundaries. I don't hate my father. I don't hate my brother. I don't even hate my mother. Hate ties you to the thing you're trying to escape. I chose distance, and distance gave me clarity. Sometimes people ask if I would do it differently, if I would handle it privately, if I would protect them for the sake of reputation. Let me ask you something. How much of yourself are you willing to lose to keep someone else comfortable? I lost 5 years. I didn't lose a sixth. Last week, Margaret's Haven secured a state grant to expand legal services across 3 counties. We've helped 87 women file protective financial affidavits. 23 have rebuilt credit. 9 have pursued charges, not revenge. Justice. There's a difference. On the 1-year anniversary of that Christmas morning, I didn't visit the house. I didn't replay the argument. I didn't check court records. I made cinnamon rolls. I lit a candle. And I ate breakfast in silence. Not the suffocating silence of gaslighting, but the clean silence of peace. I no longer define that day as the day I was erased. It was the day I stopped erasing myself. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who told you it was love, you're not dramatic. You're not ungrateful. You're not crazy. You're waking up, and waking up hurts before it heals. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments, what was the moment you realized enough was enough? Because somewhere, someone is still sitting in their own version of that driveway, thinking they're alone. They're not. The truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. And when the lies fall, what's left is you, whole, finally.